Welcome to the Music Journal podcast, where we talk about the hottest things happening in music right now, and also how you can apply it if you're an aspiring producer or musician yourself. I'm your host, Wes Yee. I'm a producer, artist, and educator, and I'm stoked to be chatting with you. Let's make history. All right, welcome to another episode of the Music Journal podcast. So before I begin this episode, I kind of want to just give you a big thank you for listening to my show. When this episode drops, this show will officially be 1 month old, and in that 1 month, which really isn't even that long of a time, we've already ranked in the top 100 in iTunes in the music category at number 91. And I just feel really blessed and amazing to have the fortune to wake up every day and know that people are following what I do and listening to this show. And I've got some really amazing things happening in the super near future, so definitely stay tuned. And just to be able to spread my message and do what I love every single day is really incredible to me. So thank you so much for listening to the show, and I hope you continue to share it and subscribe and rate it 5 stars or whatever it is that you do with this show. If you listen to it in the car or whatever you do, I hope you just continue to do it and support what I do and keep listening, because it's really just my goal with the show to give as much value as I can and get the best stories out of my guests and everything, and just give as much valuable information and entertainment as I can possibly give to you. So if you have been following this show so far, and it's totally cool if you haven't, you probably know by now that typically I pick one musical topic that's trending and I scour the internet. I try to find the best possible guest to have on the show, and we talk about it, and I get the stories out of them, and I get all the information and the secrets of the industry that people wouldn't typically tell you. You can't just search on Google and find the answers for, but you can listen to this show and you can get all that information, and not in a boring way, hopefully, is my goal. But today's episode is actually going to be a little bit different because I don't have a guest. If you've already read the title, then you know that this episode's going to be about mental health in music and kind of the music industry as well, but even just kind of beyond that, just kind of mental health in general, because there's a reason why it exists in the music industry and why it's so important and prevalent with, like Kanye and all the celebrity suicides that we unfortunately keep hearing about. It's a really, I think, just an important topic that's kind of happening right now, and we're kind of becoming more aware of it, and it's in the media all the time. And it's just so important. So this is an episode that I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. So I've asked all my friends, family, people in my network for somebody who they might think would be a good guest for this particular episode. And I've gotten some really good inquiries, but to be honest, I just didn't think that any of them could really deliver the episode the way that I wanted it to be delivered. And I'm not even convinced that I can deliver this episode the way that I want it to be delivered, but that's not going to stop me from trying. It's never stopped me before. So today's episode is going to be a little bit different. It's just going to be me talking into the microphone, which feels definitely a little weird. I definitely prefer having conversations with people, but we'll see how it goes. And then maybe if it doesn't come out the way I wanted to, then I'll release another episode in the future with one of these guests, and you guys can get a part 2 to the series of the Music Journal, where we talk about mental health and music and just kind of in general. It's also kind of ironic because if you've ever seen the show 13 Reasons Why, I recently finished that series, or at least the first 2 seasons. And the whole theme is this girl talking into this microphone by herself and recording these tapes, and everybody listens to the tapes. And I kind of feel like I'm doing that right now, and it's a pretty crazy phenomenon. And that whole show is really centered around mental health and the importance of it. So I think it's really time that I kind of put something out like this. So thank you for tuning in. And I haven't really planned this episode out. I don't really plan any of these, but what I knew I wanted to kind of start this episode with was a quote that I heard somewhat recently. And, it's really rare that I hear a quote, because I hear so many of them. It's really rare that I hear one that really grabs me, let alone grabs me so much to the point where I feel like I need to live my life by that quote. But this is one of those few, and the quote is that happiness is fleeting, but positivity is a skill. So I'm going to say that one more time because I think it's really powerful and really important. Happiness is fleeting and positivity is a skill. So this is kind of the quote that I want to center the theme of this episode around. I think it's super important, and I think it's just kind of the most true thing that I've ever heard in my entire life. And, everybody kind of lives their life trying to figure out why they're there. They say that the two most important days of your life are the day that you're born and the day you figure out why. So, everybody's out there trying to be in pursuit of this thing called happiness, which is a feeling that hopefully everybody listening has experienced. I'm going to take that back, actually. I'm going to say that it's not an if. Everybody who is listening to this episode has experienced that at some point in their life. And I don't know where you are currently, but you know what that is, and everybody is in pursuit of this feeling. But what I think is really important to understand is that it's never going to last forever. It's kind of a fleeting thing. But the second part of that quote is that positivity is a skill. So the ability to remain positive even when things are negative is a skill. And like any skill, that means it can be developed and it can be enhanced and you can get better at it. Not to say that I'm perfect at it by any means, or that anybody I think even exists is perfect at it by any means. But, this is a skill that's really worth working on. And I think it's something that's so important. It's crazy because we kind of idolize these celebrities, as a society as a whole. You have people who kind of go against the grain, and I think it's a smart thing to do that to a degree. But, we as a society, we idolize these celebrities, but at the same time, we have all these celebrities with so many mental health problems, outside of the music space. Even Daniel Radcliffe, the person who played Harry Potter in all the Harry Potter movies, that seems like a life that all of us would want. He's a famous actor and he's made all this millions of dollars, and it seems like everything is good. But the side of it that people don't really realize is that his parents were actually involved in the entertainment industry, and they saw what this industry can do to people. So they actually suggested Daniel Radcliffe, before he took the role as Harry Potter, to not take the role as Harry Potter. But, he said, Mom and Dad, I've seen what it does and I'm aware of it, so I can combat it and everything will be all right. And what people don't really realize is Daniel Radcliffe actually became an alcoholic. And that kind of goes to one of the things that kind of made me wanted to make this episode in the first place. I know it's a really heavy topic, is the whole Kanye thing. He put out this album and I probably don't even need to tell you all of the crazy shit this guy is posting on Twitter and just saying on the news and hanging out with Donald Trump and all this crazy shit. But, it's really important to realize that if you're going through some sort of mental thing, you're not the only person going through it. You may idolize somebody who's in the limelight and think that if you were in that position, it would be no different. But it's not really the case, because as we can see, people like Kanye West and Justin Bieber, who are, I would say, your top dogs in this music industry, and even if you're like an indie artist or whatever, and not really in the mainstream space, there's no really denying that in terms of this industry in particular, people, your Kanye West, your Justin Biebers, those are your top dogs right there in terms of success, financial success in the music industry. And I've thought about this a lot. Justin Bieber was famous when he was fucking 13 years old, you know? That's a really young age to become famous. And just as fast as he became famous, he became pretty much the number one hated person in this entire planet. So think about, I don't know about you, but I know when I was 13 years old, I cared a lot about what people thought of me. 13 was definitely a pretty weird year for me. It was definitely when I was kind of experimenting with different cultures that I wanted to be a part of. And it's roughly the time I discovered hip hop and skateboarding and all the amazing things that I feel so privileged to be able to do now. But in order to find those things that, I'm really passionate about, I had to go through a lot of other things that I wasn't so passionate about in the, I guess, identity crisis that came with being 13 and experimenting. And it's a good thing. But if you're 13 years old and you care that much about, your reputation and what other people think of you and all this shit that doesn't really matter when you get older, I'm 24 now and I could give a shit what anybody thinks about the fact that I fucking skateboard or make music or have a podcast. I don't see how you can not have some sort of mental breakdown and do some dumb shit. It only makes sense. So, this kid, I'd say all things considered, he turned out pretty good because he went from this super famous YouTube celebrity before you could even become like a quote unquote YouTube celebrity. And literally overnight, he goes to putting out Baby with Ludacris, and it becomes the most disliked video on YouTube. It's even more disliked than fucking, I don't know, I can't think of something more. That's the thing. It's the most disliked video on YouTube. So that really takes a toll on somebody's ego. I mean, compare that to, I don't know, the worst thing that happened to you when you were 13. Maybe you had a perfect, I guess, adolescent career, if you will, quote unquote, or a perfect life when you were 13, although I doubt it. But think about all the things that I guess kind of upset you when you were 13. And now imagine yourself being that young and being the most hated person on this planet, and you can't even walk outside without somebody recognizing you. That's what Justin Bieber went through. So mental health in the music industry is a very real thing. So I think it's really important to realize that life is challenging, and you go through mental health challenges. So do I. It's crazy because I am fortunate enough to have never, I definitely don't have depression or anxiety per se. I mean, I've been depressed before. So I really wanted to kind of get the perspective of somebody who has that, chemical imbalance in their brain for this episode. So I probably will at some point, but for now, I'm just going to kind of share my 2 cents on it. If you follow my music at all, and if you don't know that I put out music, all the links are in the show notes and everything, and I put them in the music at the end of this show. But you can find me at facebook.com/WESYEE music, and I'm on Spotify under my name, WESYEE. I put out an EP recently, and one of the songs, all the songs actually, are about stuff that I don't really talk about that often. That's kind of the beauty of music, and it also kind of corresponds to what I'm talking about, which is the fact that there's a lot of mental health, I guess, topics within music, because it kind of gives you the opportunity to say something that you wouldn't typically say, and you can portray the emotion in a way that goes beyond words. So it's a really powerful and amazing thing. But if you listen to specifically the second song on my EP, it's called YNW. That song is actually about one of my, well, he's not my friend anymore, but at a point in my life, he was my best friend. And this is somebody who has some really severe mental health problems, and having just kind of grown up with him, I've known him since first grade. This is somebody who was diagnosed as a psychopath. He had OCD. He had depression. You name it, he had it. And just having grown up with this person, I've kind of been engulfed in, I guess, the perception of somebody who has some really traumatic mental health issues. So I've spent a lot of time kind of thinking about what it is and what it means, and just kind of counting my blessings for not having something like that. But I guess the reason why I brought it up is because when we were kids, this isn't something that was really talked about or brought up, obviously, because when you're a kid, life hasn't really happened to you yet. This is still something that he obviously had to deal with, but he didn't have the vocabulary to say it. He didn't have the perspective to kind of compare his situation with to other people. So, when you're a kid, you think that everybody just goes through the exact same things that you go through. So, in first grade, he didn't realize that he even had depression, because he just assumed that this was something that everybody had. So that's another thing that I kind of want to touch on, is that all of this stuff is relative. The worst thing that's ever happened to me, to you, is going to feel the same as the worst thing that's ever happened to you. So this is where the positivity skill kind of comes into play. But, we were friends when we were in first grade, and we were friends all the way up until we were, I want to say, sophomores in college. And this was a very on and off friendship, and it wasn't really the healthiest relationship either. But this is somebody who, he always had my back. Like, I remember one time, we were coming back home from a party, and we were fucking hammered, and we're on this train, and I had my skateboard, and he didn't skate, so he didn't have a skateboard. But, we were just dumb teenagers. We must have been like 17 or 18 years old at the time. And we get off at this train stop, and I start peeing over the fence, like onto the ground, because we'd been drinking a lot, and that's what I had to do. Definitely not saying that what I was doing was cool at all, but this other fucking drunk guy comes up, takes my board, and he goes, "This fucking guy's peeing," and throws my board over the fence. It drops down like 20 feet. So picture like this giant fence, and I'm fucking pissing through the fence down this big drop. It's harmless college shit. This dude fucking chucks my board over, and his girlfriend's like, "Why the fuck did you do that?" But my friend, who I'm talking about, who had all these mental disorders, went over to the guy and fucking just socked him, which was also definitely not a cool thing to do. But everybody was drunk, and then it got broken up by, by not police, but like the fucking subway people or whatever, the transit officers. So I think that's why we stayed friends for as long as we did. But by the end of the friendship, he had this girlfriend at this time, and he was saying he was going to commit suicide, and he was saying all this crazy shit that was more manipulative than I would have liked to admit at the time. And it all came from this mental disorder. And it really came from the fact that at the time he didn't have the skills needed to be able to cope with what he was dealing with, which is really unfortunate that it manifested in that way. And if I were to redo it, I would have done a lot of different things differently to help him kind of build those skills and be able to be positive even when things were negative. And even as somebody who, I'm talking about myself now, but even as somebody who doesn't suffer from depression or any sort of mental illness or anything, it's still impossible to be positive 100% of the time. And we live in this society, in this world, where I feel like we try to portray, the best of our lives, and we put it on Instagram or whatever and try to show everybody that everything's cool. But when in reality, it's not going to be cool all the time. And if you don't have somebody who you can be vulnerable with and really share those truths with, it's going to be a lot harder to kind of deal with the negativity and maintain positivity. So that's kind of why I brought up the stories, because I think that if he had the skills to be positive, then things would have turned out a little bit differently. And I realized, to somebody who is listening who suffers from depression or some sort of mental illness, that sounds incredibly insensitive. I know exactly what you're thinking, because I talk to this guy every single day and he said the same thing. And to a degree, you're right, because I have been depressed before. And I realize, when you're in that state of mind, to hear somebody come up to you and say, oh, just be positive. Just be happy. Like, why don't you just do that? It's almost insulting, actually, and it's really fucked up. But here's kind of my philosophy and my take on that. Is that you're given the cards that you're given at the end of the day. It could be whatever. Maybe you're short, or you fucking, I don't know, are left-handed, or whatever cards you were given. There's elements to it that you can't change, and that's really unfortunate. And everybody's brain chemistry is different. So if you were born with some sort of chemical imbalance, that sucks. That's the card that you were given. And it's really important that you get the help and the care that you need. But I think, to take the steps in the right direction, I think all happiness is, at the end of the day, is being okay with the negatives that you were given. I'm going to say that again. I think all happiness is being okay with the negatives that you were given. And for me, I have plenty of negatives, believe me, but the way that I kind of cope with them, especially when they come up, because some days are better than others. Today was an amazing day. I've actually had really, really great days recently, and I feel really fortunate for that. But they're not all like that. And I think for me, it's really important to have outlets. So that's why I really love making this podcast and speaking to musicians and producers, because you can actually take those negatives and you can channel them into positives by turning them into something, turning them into a creation, and making music out of it, and making and just creating something. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be poetry, it could be music, whatever you're feeling that day, you can turn that negative emotion into something and have that as an outlet. It's funny, because if you listen to some of my songs, you probably wouldn't think that I'm really that positive of a person. But the truth is, it's funny, because I saw my mom the other day. I don't live with my parents anymore, but I try to see them at least like once a month. And she was like, yeah, I heard one of your songs, and she was like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Like, I was hearing this like depressing song. She must have listened to the wrong song, but at that time, that wasn't a positive moment for me. But I was able to channel that into a piece of art and put it out in the world, in a creation, and that turns that negative into a positive. It's a really healthy thing to be able to get it off of your chest and kind of show that vulnerable side of yourself, and to have other people listen to it and relate to it kind of only adds to that. So I think that if you have some sort of mental illness, first of all, I want to say I'm extremely sorry. I know that doesn't help anybody. But I think that the only thing you can do is to figure out a way to become okay with it. And one way to do that is to channel it into something else that's positive, so you can actually shift it into something different. And that you'll find, actually, the more you do that, the more your mindset shifts as well. I'm kind of on the side that negativity is contagious. And I think positivity is the same way. And this is kind of how you build the skill. It's like any other skill. If you want to get really good at the piano, you have to sit at the piano every single day and practice your scales, and you have to practice music and just getting better at playing the piano. And if you want to get better at being positive, you have to train your brain to kind of be more positive. And it's never going to be 100% of the time, but if we're talking about mental health and music, which is what this episode ultimately is centered around, you can use music as an outlet to do that. And I do all sorts of other things too, not to say I'm a fucking therapist or fucking guru or anything, because I'm definitely not, and I've got a lot of work to do on my own and a long way to go. But things like meditation really help. But it's like the 5 steps or whatever. You go through like denial, you go through fucking whatever, depression, whatever, and then ultimately acceptance. So I think the way to combat any sort of mental health issue is to accept that it's a part of your life. And once you've accepted that that's a part of your life, I think then you can kind of move forward from there. Obviously, easier said than done. But from there, you can ultimately learn to be okay with it. I have 2 sisters, actually. And I remember the first time I ever felt any sort of depression or anything was the first time a girl who I was in love with broke up with me. And I was never close with this sister. She's the middle of the 3 of us. She's only 2 years younger than I am. But for whatever reason, I ended up talking to her about it. And she told me that she suffers from depression even more frequently than I have, which isn't that often. But at the time, it really felt like that was just the end of it. Like that was just the rest of my life. You know what I mean? And she told me that she suffers from it. And she said that it took a lot of time, but she's kind of come to a point where she's okay with it because she sees the light at the end of the tunnel, and she realizes that once she gets through this, it's all relative. So the light at the end of the tunnel is that much better because she got through this point and she pushed through it, and she recognized that it's not going to be forever and it'll pass, and it always does. So that's another thing that I kind of really, really took home, and I really valued that conversation. That's that was a rant and a half, but those are kind of all my thoughts on mental health, especially in music. Artists and producers listening right now, you have an amazing ability, and it's really your duty at this point. If you've spent any time trying to be an artist, or if you spent any time listening to my podcast, you don't only owe it to yourself, in my opinion, to continue to make music and work on your own mental health and psyche. I don't care how happy of a person you are, how positive of a person you are. Everybody can still work on it. And I think music is an amazing way to do that. And I'm super blessed to have found that. And I know you are too, or at least you should be. And that's really something to be positive about. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of homework. This is something I try to do every day. Truth be told, I don't always get to it, but every day I try to write down 3 things that I'm grateful for, and that really helps me kind of set my mindset into a positive one. I do it in the morning before I check my phone or my emails or anything. That's, I guess, my homework to you. And even beyond that, I don't want this to feel like a fucking, quote unquote assignment or whatever. But even aside from that, I hope this episode helps. If you want me to talk to somebody else about this topic, I would love to. If you think that you know somebody who can deliver an amazing episode, because you guys come first with this podcast, it's really just how it is. This show is for you. So if you know somebody who you think I could talk to about this, and we could make a really amazing episode that could be really helpful, shoot me an email. My email is wes@homestudiohits.com, and hopefully we can get it together. But aside from that, if that never happens, I hope that this episode has at least helped you in some way, and I look forward to having another guest on. I've got one for next week's episode, and I'll have plenty more guests. But also let me know if you like these monologue type, rant type episodes too, because I'm happy to do more of these as well. So yeah, that'll be it. Until next time, peace. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Music Journal. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got a lot out of it. If you want to know more about me and what I do, I just put out a personal EP on Spotify. You can go to bit.ly/Wes Yee Spotify. And if you want to know more about music production, I teach an online course about it too. Just shoot an email to wes@homestudiohits.com, and I'll send you an application. Just for filling out the application, I'll send you a free sample pack of sounds I use to make the instrumental you're listening to, and more. All these links will be available in the show notes, so you can check them out there. And while you're there, if you feel inclined to rate this show 5 stars, that would really help me out. Other than that, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks again. Peace.